Who is Clement of Rome? Should I be Catholic or Protestant? Does the Pope have authority over my life or absolute authority over the Church? We're going to discuss that in this video. This video is a part of a larger series of videos called The Disciple. If you go to our YouTube channel, Bethel Pittsburgh, and go under playlist, you'll find a playlist titled The Disciple. In there, you'll notice that the titles of the videos will say The Disciple and then a category and sometimes a subcategory. And all the videos are arranged in category order. This is under church history. Now, in church history, what we've been exploring is the way things unfolded from biblical times till now have a bearing on why things are the way they are. It informs us on how to interact with other people, other Christians in particular, and it helps us to know kind of where to set our course in different ways. And so we're only in the early stages. We're in the period of what's called the early church. So the first 3 to 4 centuries of church history is referred to as the early church. And we've been turning over from the first century into the second century. Now, some people don't know this, but the first century is like 0 to 99, and the second century, even though the number starts with 1, it's all the 100s, but it's actually the second century. So we're moving into the first century, and we've followed different things that took place in biblical times. We hit different events that have transpired outside of the biblical time frame or outside of the biblical text, and we've run into the early historian and Josephus, and now we're going to start touching on individuals that were close associates, disciples of some of the apostles, or at least close to that, and why they have a bearing on church history. So Clement of Rome is the first that we're going to explore. So Clement of Rome, it's not sure when he was born, but he did die somewhere around 100 AD. So he did live during the time of the biblical text and of the biblical church, and he became the Bishop of Rome. These are coming from this surfaces in different writings from the 2nd century. Sometimes the 3rd century of Christians and church leaders are writing about things that took place in the church. And Clement was the Bishop of Rome at some point. It must have been at least prior to 100, because that's when he died. And there are conflicting details on the chronology, whether he was the first or second or the third or the fourth. So there's different testimonies of where he sat in that order. But at some point, he was the Bishop of Rome. Now, he came to be referred to as the Pope, or the Pope of Rome. And one of the things to keep in mind, so the Catholic view is he was a successor to Peter, and because of that term Pope was used towards Clement, then this is a demonstration that the papistry is a biblical church concept, because he was referred to as Pope. It's an affirmation of papal authority, and they'll use comments. So Clement wrote a letter in Corinth to the Corinthians, and in that letter he affirmed that the presbyters that were existing who had been established in Corinth were established by the apostles and therefore carried the apostolic authority. And that's from that statement in his letter is where Catholics will carry forward this idea of apostolic succession, that over the generations, the church authority gets designated to certain church leaders, which moves in the direction of the Pope and the papistry and all of the different cardinals and individuals that are a part of this carry authority even over the Scripture. Now, the historical view to consider is that the term Pope was not actually used in Clement's day. No one referred to him as Pope during his lifetime. That term began to become used of him later. And so you can't actually bring that term back to there because of that dynamic that, yes, he was referred to as Pope, but not till after his life. The term was used as like a honor type term. It comes from, I can't remember what language, probably Latin or Greek or one of those languages that means father, which is also a Catholic direction because they would refer to their priest as father and things of that nature. So that's what sits there. But again, he didn't actually have that term until after his death, and it wasn't actually until, and these are things we'll get to in church history, is it wasn't actually till about 1073 A.D., so about 1,000 years after the biblical time period, that Gregory the Seventh established the pontiff in its present form and made all those assertions that the Catholic Pope has absolute authority over the church and the Christians and the church and the biblical text and all of those things. And so these are things that to keep in mind, because the question of whether or not Catholicism is the biblical form of Christianity, and again, the kind of authority that the Pope has. This is a lot of where that sits is the historical context, and Catholics will take the view that because early on in the first century, the word Pope is ascribed in that direction, and because you have Clement speaking of church leaders carrying a high level of apostolic authority, that means that the papistry in its current form is the biblical way. And you're going to have to decide as you look at the history whether or not that's true. And I'm of the position that it's not true, that the history demonstrates that this idea wasn't formed till much later, at least in its present form, and that the Bible is that which has the authority over the church and over our lives, not various Christian leaders. And you could think about all the problems that could surface if that is your starting point. So nonetheless, Clement is considered to be the first of the early church fathers, and you can see why. He died in 100, so he lived in that first century. Most of the early church fathers are spending most of their lifetime into the second century. Tertullian, who lived 160 to 240 A.D., claims that Clement was ordained by Peter, so there's that apostolic relationship. Irenaeus, who was a church historian in the maybe 2nd and 3rd century, said that Clement was a personal acquaintance of the apostles, and he's one of the successors of the apostles. Some believe that he is the Clement that is referred to in Philippians 4, verse 3. And there are writings by the 4th century that say that he was, again, this is historical writings referring to things a few hundred years before, but they say that he was executed in 100 A.D. By the Emperor Trajan, the Roman Emperor Trajan, by being attached to an anchor and thrown out into the sea somewhere near Greece, which is why he and not only in the Catholic faith but a number of other liturgical faiths refer to Clement as the patron saint of mariners because of the way he was executed. Again, his impact is whether or not Catholicism is the biblical thing, and a lot of that came from his letter that he wrote to the Corinthians, asserting that the presbyters in Corinth have apostolic authority because they were appointed by apostles. Again, shows how close in history he was, and it creates all of those debates about this. His writings are some of the earliest, if not the earliest, church writings after the biblical text. Some claim he wrote other letters like Second Clement, the epistles on virginity, but later this was demonstrated to be inaccurate, that these were they were likely forgeries and not written by him. There's much debate on his views on synergism. So he had a theological viewpoint. So synergism is where we're saved by grace through faith, but there's still an impact of our behavior in response and our righteousness in response to that faith. And this is a theological struggle within the biblical text all the way to today, because the biblical text wrestles with, we can't save ourselves. To believe in works-based salvation is a heresy. But at the same time, the biblical text talks about how if we don't have works, faith without works is dead. Jesus even teaches that you will know them by their fruits. So there's different things that demonstrate that whether or not a person has genuine faith. And people have landed on the side of our actions are not relevant at all to whether or not we have faith, to our actions are the basis of our faith, and anywhere in between. And so Clement wrestled in his writings with the same kind of concept, and some have accused him of being synergistic. And the reason why these things are important is the early church writers were the closest to the apostles, and so they're the closest of giving us clarity on the biblical text than anybody else. It doesn't mean that they were infallible and absolutely correct and we should go by everything that they say, but their voice does carry weight. And so that such an early church father in Clement of Rome was wrestling with this idea that our works do have some kind of factor in our faith, does shed some light on how we view salvation. And again, people will debate that and will debate whether or not he's relevant and all of those kind of things. But you will see this as we keep moving forward through church history. You will see that the things we believe, and you see this written in Scripture, that the church is built upon Christ as the cornerstone and the apostles as the foundation, and then everybody else builds on top of that. All of our theology and views and the way we view things, whether biblical or not, are heavily influenced by the historical church all the way to this point, and we are the beneficiaries of all this developed theology, or we are given certain struggles because of the way that the church has carried itself in the past. So the more we have an understanding of this, it will give us a healthy way to navigate through our faith. If you have any questions on that, please leave that in the comments below. I'd be glad to answer them. Or if you would like to grow in your faith in person and you live in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, we would love for you to join us. We are Bethel Assembly of God at 2501 Staten Street. We meet Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. and Sundays at 10 a.m. Or if you can't join us in person, you can always join us via live streaming. We stream our Sunday services on our YouTube channel live at 10 a.m. on Sundays. We hope to see you at either place, but may God richly bless you.